Prime Minister has announced a $1 billion low emissions technology fund as part of its commitment to meet net zero by 2050. The fund aimed at fast-tracking emerging technologies. Joining us live now is the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese. Anthony Albanese, good morning to you. The Prime Minister about to give a speech on this morning, but will Labor support the legislation?
Well, what legislation, Peter? We haven't seen it. I'll make 3 points. Firstly, Scott Morrison didn't take this policy to Glasgow because, a bit like his EV policy, it lacks a great deal of substance. It's all about style and all about spin. Now he comes back after the conference. He's announcing policy. If he could have landed any of his 20 energy policies, we'd know about that now. And once again, it's all about the politics. So note in the articles on the front page, it's all about wedging Labor, not about the substance. If the Prime Minister comes forward with serious policy, with grunt, without trying to talk about the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the very body that he tried to abolish, as if he's now a supporter, it's a bit like his EV policy. It fails the laugh test. He's hoping that people are goldfish and they don't remember what happened just 2 years ago.
I will ask about EVs in just a moment, but the premise of the fund, it's going to be a split between public and private, $500 million each. Do you support that?
Well, there you go again, Peter. I make this point. You announced in your initial question to me that it was $1 billion fund. It's not. It's not. The proposal is for half that, perhaps. But we'll look at the detail and then the private sector to invest what the private sector does in its own operations.
Okay.
This is the very government that abolished more than $500 million from the designated fund that was there when they came to office for carbon capture and storage. They abolished more than $500 million, and now they're saying, oh, we'll put a bit back, we'll pretend it's more, we'll add in the private sector investment. I mean, seriously, this government cannot be taken seriously when it comes to climate action. The Australian people know that. This is a Prime Minister who pretends that he has no history in all of these issues, and the history of this is he tried to abolish the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. He tried to abolish ARENA. He tried to abolish the renewable energy target. He opposed electric vehicles. He opposed all of the new technologies that he talks about. And still, with the announcements, there's a lack of substance once again.
But you are open to the fund, am I picking up?
Well, we supported carbon capture and storage. What fund, Peter? What's the fund?
Well, this is the Low Emissions Technology Fund. This is the big pitch this morning. So you said you're going to take a look at it. Does that mean that you might be open to it?
It's not, but well, we always take a look at legislation on its merits.
Okay, so that means that you unlock your opposition?
This isn't a new fund.
So does that mean, though, that if you are open to it, that you would unlock your opposition to expanding the CEFC to include carbon capture and storage?
Hang on, Peter. Just think about what you've just said to me in the questions. You said there was a new fund, a low emissions technology fund, and then you said the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Which one is it?
It's all of it. As I understand, it's the low emissions technology, the Commercialisation Fund, which would be run by the CEFC.
Hang on. Now there's another name in there, the Commercialisation Fund. That's the point here, Peter. This is a government that's thrashing about trying to come into the 21st century. The fact is that new technologies have been taken up overseas in far greater rates because we have a government that has held back the uptake of new technology. We have a government that abolished the fund that was specifically there of greater than the amount they're talking about now for carbon capture and storage. We have a government that tried to abolish the Clean Energy Finance Corporation in total. And now they're talking about, well, I'm not quite sure what they're talking about. We'll wait and see what is actually proposed. But when you listen to the Prime Minister this morning, I'll give you the big tip. He'll talk about Labor. He'll talk about what Labor will do. He's been in government for they're nearing the end of almost a decade in office. He's shooting for a second decade in office, and he wants to pretend that the first decade just didn't happen.
On to EVs. If Labor was ahead of its time in 2019 by promising to halve all of new car sales to be electric by 2030, which has since been adopted by the US, even in New South Wales, and as a minimum in the United Kingdom, why not back it in again?
Well, we weren't ahead of our time, Peter. We weren't ahead of our time.
Well, I mean, what my point is that...
We were on time. We were in the 21st century. This mob were running around saying that electric vehicles would end the weekend, saying that you couldn't tow your boat or your trailer. I mean, there are B-doubles, there are big trucks in Europe that are electric vehicles. Buses here are electric vehicles. You've had an amazing change throughout the world. I went to a conference back in 2009 as the Minister for Transport in Japan. Japan knows a little bit about vehicles. And there, every single auto manufacturer was saying, more than a decade ago, there was no research going on to internal combustion engines. It was all about EVs. It was about hydrogen. It was about new clean energy. And this government have just held Australia back. We had under 2% of our new vehicle sales last year being EVs.
So why not do that policy again?
Norway, the figure is 70%.
Why not reheat your 2019 policy?
What policy? Peter, you're asking me about what the Prime Minister pretends the policy was. Yeah, there was no policy ever from Labor imposing any restrictions on whatever vehicle people wanted to buy. What there was, just as New South Wales has said, you'll be able to buy any vehicle in New South Wales. I'll give you the big tip. You'll be able to buy any vehicle. What the New South Wales government has said is that Matt Keane has said that they estimate that 50% of new vehicle sales in New South Wales will be electric vehicles in 2030. Why do they say that? Because the auto manufacturers tell them that, Peter. They tell them that. This is all a complete nonsense.
No, fair enough.
Pretty soon after that, you are not going to be able to buy something other than a clean energy vehicle, an electric vehicle or some such. That is what is happening.
Yeah.
And this nonsense that the government had of, Labor's telling you what to do, Labor's going to put on those restrictions, just ignores, for a party that says it supports markets and says it supports capitalism, they're pretty opposed to it from time to time. Capitalism is moving with the market, with new technology. And that is what is going on here. And the Prime Minister's furphy yesterday, how embarrassing. Him standing at a press conference at the Toyota factory that his government urged to leave Australia, that used to produce manufacturing cars here in Australia. And he stands there and he says, I didn't say I was against electric vehicles. Well, come on, Peter.
Yeah.
Fair dinkum.
It was a bit of a word salad.
He ran a campaign day after day, week after week. And that's the thing about this Prime Minister. You can't trust what he says. And if you can't trust what he said in 2019, you shouldn't commit to what he says. You shouldn't trust him in 2022.
Just a final one. We're out of time, but when we were looking at a pretty long election campaign here, and Andrew Clennell mentioned yesterday that...
We could keep talking till then, mate.
Well, I've only got a short... I just want to get this one more question in. Andrew Clennell mentioned yesterday the approach is Keating-esque. To do you slowly, Anthony Albanese. Are you up for it?
Look, this is a bloke who only has a political frame. That's all he's had since the day that he became the pretend Prime Minister. He always just focuses on the 24-hour media cycle. He's focused on the announcement, not what it looks like in a week or a month, let alone a year or a decade. And that's why he keeps tying himself in knots and getting himself into trouble with a lack of consistency when it comes to issues like climate change, like electric vehicles, like so many other issues. If your focus is just on the next headline from friendly media outlets, then inevitably you won't have the sort of plan that Australia needs to take us into the future. We have, for example, a $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund, $15 billion, not $500 million, that will fund new industries, that will support private sector operations to create new jobs, to create new industries, particularly in our regions, across the board, taking advantage of clean energy, manufacturing trains and other heavy manufacturing here, looking at new industries, transitioning areas like steel and aluminium to use clean energy. We have a $15 billion fund. We announced that a year ago. This government inevitably will always focus on the short term. And what we'll see from now until whenever the election's called is those short-term, 24-hour announcements that, guess what, you forget what they said a couple of weeks ago. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, they stood up in the Blue Room and made their major climate change announcement. Where's it gone? They've now got new spin out there today, new spin yesterday, because there was no substance in their big announcement that they released in Canberra just a couple of weeks ago.
Anthony Albanese, good to have you with us this morning. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.